couldn't blame my mom. I couldn't blame my parents, couldn't blame my friends.
Heartbreaking is what describes the last words of these kids before execution following their sentencing. For some, it came from a place of remorse and regret. However, others proved to be as cynical as their crimes.
If I've never hurt you, then why do you want me to die?
Seeing the families of their victims in court, or the heavyweight penalty by law, didn't necessarily shake them. While I take you through these heartbreaking declarations, you will get to see the reactions of the victims' families, who will forever be reminded of their loss.
If they give me clemency, I'll keep doing something with my life. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think I'm going to die in 2 weeks.
Meanwhile, don't be surprised to feel some emotions for some of these teenagers who seemingly met their end before their lives began. George Stinney Jr. I begin with the heart-wrenching reality of a teenage boy who became the first to be executed by law. The small town of Alcolu, South Carolina, in the year 1944 was a time of racial tension and injustice, and George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old African-American boy, found himself at the center of a horrific crime. 2 young white girls, Betty June Benniker and Mary Emma Thames, had been brutally murdered, and the town was desperate for answers. Without any substantial evidence, the police turned their attention to George Stinney Jr. His family, living in poverty, became an easy target for the authorities. In a shocking turn of events, George was arrested and charged with the murders. The trial that followed was nothing short of a travesty of justice. The trial began with Charles Plowden, George's court-appointed attorney, who did little to defend his client. Plowden failed to call any witnesses to the stand or present any evidence that could cast doubt on the prosecution's case. The most significant piece of evidence against George was his alleged confession, but there was no written record of this confession. The prosecution painted a picture of George Stinney Jr. as a cold-blooded killer, using his alleged confession as their strongest weapon. They claimed that George had confessed to murdering Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames after his plan to have sex with one of the girls failed, but there were lingering doubts about the circumstances surrounding this supposed confession. Throughout the trial, George Stinney Jr. sat alone, without the support of his family or anyone who truly believed in his innocence. The weight of the accusations and the overwhelming presence of the courtroom must have been unbearable for a young boy of just 14 years old. After a deliberation that lasted less than 10 minutes, the all-white jury found George Stinney Jr. guilty of murder, with no recommendation for mercy. The verdict was met with shock and disbelief, as many questioned the fairness and integrity of the trial. On April 24, 1944, George Stinney Jr. was sentenced to die by electrocution. But even in the face of such a grave sentence, there were those who believed in George's innocence and fought for his life. Organizers from both white and black ministerial unions petitioned Governor Olin Johnston to grant George clemency, highlighting his young age and the potential for a miscarriage of justice. Hundreds of letters and telegrams poured into the governor's office, pleading for mercy and calling for a fair reconsideration of George's case. But despite the outcry and the appeals for justice, none of it was enough to save George Stinney Jr. from his fate. On June 16, 1944, he walked into the execution chamber at the South Carolina State Penitentiary, a small and frail boy weighed down by an unjust conviction. The switch was flipped, and 2,400 volts surged through George's body. After 2 more jolts of electricity, the life of the youngest person ever executed in the United States came to a tragic end. The entire process, from arrest to execution, took less than 3 months. What did he say before his execution? Well, something louder than all the words put together. Stinney Jr. was silent. For 70 long years, George Stinney Jr.'s name remained tarnished, his story forgotten. It was not until 2014 that a team of dedicated lawyers and activists took up his case, determined to uncover the truth and clear his name. Through tireless research and investigation, they discovered shocking flaws in the original trial. There was no physical evidence linking George to the crime, and the only evidence presented against him was his alleged confession, which was obtained under duress and without proper legal representation. Finally, in 2014, 70 years after his execution, George Stinney Jr. was exonerated. A South Carolina judge ruled that his conviction was a grave miscarriage of justice and that he had not received a fair trial. It was a bittersweet victory, as George was no longer alive to see his name cleared. The exoneration of George Stinney Jr. shed light on the deep-rooted racial injustices that plagued the American criminal justice system. His sister, Amy, was delighted with the final verdict.
I feel exonerated. I feel happy. I feel blessed. I feel, Lord have mercy, Jesus. I just wish my mom and daddy was here to see this day.
It served as a stark reminder that even in the land of the free, justice is not always blind. Napoleon Beasley. As we delve into the life of Napoleon Beasley, it is important to understand the background that led to his infamous last statement. Born on August 19, 1976, in Grapeland, Texas, Beasley grew up in a middle-class family with loving parents and siblings. However, his life took a dark turn when he became involved in a heinous crime that would forever change his fate. On April 19, 1994, at the age of 17, Beasley and two accomplices, Cedric Coleman and Donald Coleman, committed a shocking act of violence that would reverberate throughout the nation. Armed with stolen guns, they targeted John Lutig, a prominent businessman and father of U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals Judge J. Michael Lutig. The trio ambushed Lutig outside his home in Tyler, Texas, as he returned from a dinner with his wife. In a chilling display of brutality, Beasley and his accomplices shot Lutig multiple times, leaving him mortally wounded. They then fled the scene, leaving behind a devastated family and a community in shock. Beasley and his accomplices were apprehended within days, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. During the trial, it was revealed that Beasley had meticulously planned the crime, driven by a desire for material gain and a misguided sense of power. The prosecution painted a picture of a young man who had lost his way, succumbing to the allure of a criminal lifestyle. In August 1994, Beasley was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Beasley's journey through the legal system was fraught with appeals and legal battles, as his defense team fought to overturn the death sentence. However, despite their efforts, the courts upheld the conviction and the sentence, setting the stage for Beasley's final moments. The moment finally arrived on May 28, 2002. Napoleon Beasley, now 25 years old, stood on the precipice of his fate. In the death chamber of the Huntsville unit in Texas, he prepared to utter his final words before the lethal injection would take his life. The anticipation in the room was palpable, as witnesses, including members of the media, gathered to witness this historic event. With a calm and composed demeanor, Beasley addressed the room, his voice carrying a mixture of regret, defiance, and a plea for understanding. He began by acknowledging the pain and suffering he had caused, expressing remorse for the heinous crime he had committed. He spoke of the profound impact his actions had on the Lutig family and the community at large, acknowledging the irreparable damage he had caused. But Beasley's last statement was not solely focused on his remorse. He used this final opportunity to shed light on the flaws and injustices he believed were inherent in the criminal justice system. He spoke of the racial disparities that plagued the system, highlighting the disproportionate number of individuals from marginalized communities who found themselves on death row. Beasley also addressed the issue of redemption and the potential for change. He spoke of his personal growth and transformation during his time on death row, emphasizing the importance of second chances and the possibility of rehabilitation. In his words, "There are a lot of men like me on death row, good men, who fell to the same misguided emotions but may not have recovered as I have. Give those men a chance to do what's right. Give them a chance to undo their wrongs. A lot of them want to fix the mess they started, but don't know how." Some were moved by his words, finding empathy and compassion in his plea for understanding. Others remained skeptical, questioning the sincerity of his remorse and the validity of his arguments against the death penalty. As the lethal injection was administered, Beasley's final words echoed in the minds of those who had witnessed this extraordinary event. His statement served as a reminder of the humanity that exists even in the face of the most heinous crimes, and the need for a justice system that reflects our collective values. Years after losing their son, the Beasleys sat down with the man who arranged the room for their son's death. They all agreed that Napoleon was a kid who could have been rehabilitated. However, knowing that he was in a place void of pain was all the consolation they needed. Beasley's mom said,
"Knowing that Napoleon was in solitary confinement, knowing he had an execution date was a little bittersweet."
Sean Richard Sellers.
But I didn't like losing. Couldn't stand to lose,
These were the words of Sean Sellers shortly after his arrest. Born on May 18, 1969, Sellers' descent into darkness began at a young age. As a sophomore at Putnam City North High School in Oklahoma, he delved into the world of Satanism, participating in disturbing rituals and displaying a fascination with the occult. It was on September 8, 1985, that Sellers committed his first murder, forever staining the walls of a Circle K convenience store with innocent blood. Robert Bauer, a 35-year-old clerk, had no idea that his life was about to be brutally cut short, but Sellers' thirst for blood was far from quenched. 6 months later, on March 5, 1986, he turned his rage towards his own family. In the dead of night, dressed only in black underwear, Sellers crept into his parents' bedroom as they peacefully slept. With a heart filled with cold hatred, he aimed his weapon and shot his stepfather, Paul Lee Bellofato, in the head. Vonda, his mother, woke up to the horrifying sight and attempted to rise, only only to be met with another bullet. Sellers showed no mercy, ensuring that his victims would never see the light of day again. The motive behind Sellers' brutal act of matricide and patricide was rooted in his anger towards his mother's interference in his relationship with his girlfriend, a high school dropout. Fueled by his twisted beliefs and a desire to assert his dominance, Sellers performed an occult ritual before the murders. At the time of his crimes, Sellers was just 16 years old, making him one of the youngest individuals to face the death penalty in the United States. This fact alone ignited a fierce discussion about the age at which someone can be held fully responsible for their actions. Opponents of his execution argued that his young age should have been taken into account, emphasizing that juveniles are still developing mentally and emotionally and therefore should not be subjected to the same punishment as adults. Adding to the controversy was the diagnosis of multiple personality disorder, which emerged years after Sellers' imprisonment. A Texas psychiatrist working on Sellers' behalf claimed that he suffered from this condition, which raised further questions about his mental state at the time of the crimes. They contended that his condition may have influenced his actions and that he should have received treatment rather than the death penalty. However, prosecutors were not required to challenge the diagnosis in court, and it was not considered during the appeals process. The controversy surrounding Sellers' case extended beyond the legal and psychiatric realms. Prominent figures, including Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, the American Bar Association, and an ex-wife of rock star Mick Jagger, advocated for clemency on the grounds of his age and mental health. They argued that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which prohibits capital punishment for individuals below 18 years of age, should have been applied in Sellers' case. Moreover, in the confines of his prison cell, Sellers also began a journey towards redemption. It was within these walls that he found solace in the embrace of Christianity, a faith that would become the guiding light in his life. However, those who monitored Sellers during his time in prison had a different perspective. Former wardens and a former death row unit manager described him as a manipulator who exhibited model behavior when visitors from the Christian community were present. They believed that his transformation from Satan worshipper to Christian minister was an act designed to garner sympathy and support.
The only people who really have a right to want to see me dead are the people I've hurt. The people who are still hurting today because of what I did when I was 16 years old, those people have a right to hate me. No, I didn't come here to ask for justice. I came here to beg for mercy.
On the day of his execution, Sellers' last words mirrored his newfound faith and transformation. As the lethal injection coursed through his veins, Sellers sang and spoke to his witnesses, proclaiming his imminent reunion with his father. Sellers said loudly, "Here I come, Father. I'm coming home." Thereafter, he turned to Warden Gary Gibson and said, "Let's do it, Gary. Let's get it on." Just before taking his last breaths, Sellers cheerfully sang, "Set my spirit free that I might praise thee. Set my spirit free that I might worship thee," to the hearing of the grim-faced witnesses gathered in the room. Those were his last words. However, earlier in the day, Sellers addressed the family members of his stepfather, counseling them to allow God to heal their hearts from the understandable hate they felt towards him. In his words, "When you wake up and nothing has changed inside, reach out to God and he will be there for you. Reach out to God and he will heal you. Let him touch your hearts. Don't hate all your lives." He ended the statement by telling the 7 witnesses, "I love you all." T.J. Lane. It was a seemingly ordinary morning on February 27, 2012, when chaos erupted within the walls of Chardon High School. T.J. Lane, a quiet and introverted student, walked into the cafeteria armed with a .22 caliber pistol. In a matter of minutes, 3 innocent victims were fatally shot, while 2 others sustained serious injuries. What could have driven T.J. Lane to commit such a horrific act? Investigators delved into his background, searching for clues that might shed light on his motive. Lane's troubled upbringing soon came to the forefront. Born on September 19, 1994, he grew up in a broken home, plagued by domestic violence and substance abuse. His parents' turbulent relationship took a toll on him, leaving emotional scars that would manifest in his later years. Throughout his adolescence, Lane struggled with mental health issues, including depression and anger management problems. He was known to harbor a deep-seated resentment towards his peers, often feeling like an outcast within the school community. Rumors circulated that Lane had been a victim of bullying, further fueling his anger and isolation. However, concrete evidence to support these claims remained elusive. The true motive behind his actions remained shrouded in mystery, as Lane himself remained tight-lipped about his reasons for targeting his fellow students. Shortly after the shooting, Lane was arrested by police near his car, which was parked outside the school. As news of Lane's capture spread, the community began to grapple with a new set of emotions. Relief mingled with anger and sorrow as they sought justice for the lives lost and the scars that would forever remain. The courtroom became the stage for the next chapter in the T.J. Lane saga. T.J. Lane, now facing charges of aggravated murder, attempted murder, and felonious assault, appeared before the judge and jury. His demeanor was chilling, devoid of any remorse or emotion. Throughout the trial, Lane maintained an eerie calmness, his face often expressionless, as if detached from the gravity of his actions. Although the defense tried to paint Lane as a victim of circumstance, his behavior during the trial pointed to him being a calculated and cold killer. However, it was what he did during his sentencing that convinced everyone of his murder credentials. After arriving at the courtroom for his sentencing, Lane raised eyebrows when he unbuttoned his blue button-down shirt, revealing a white t-shirt with the word "killer" boldly written across the front in black marker. As the courtroom filled with the loved ones of the victims, T.J. Lane doubled his unrepentant antics. The Ohio school shooter told everyone in the court, "All of you." With a smirk on his face, Lane delivered a short, crude statement that ended with the offensive words. The courtroom was left in stunned silence as Lane then proceeded to stick up his middle finger toward the grieving families. Lane's actions confirmed the prosecutor's description of him as a disgusting human being. The families, already devastated by the loss of their loved ones, were further traumatized by Lane's callous behavior. It was a moment that would forever be etched in their memories, a stark reminder of the pain and suffering caused by this senseless act of violence.
Why would you want to hurt him? You don't know kind. You're evil.
Unsurprisingly, the families of T.J. Lane's victims did not hold back in expressing their anger, grief, and disgust towards him. They called him repulsive and expressed their fervent hope that he would be locked up in a cage like an animal for the rest of his life. Dina Palmator, the mother of one of the victims, delivered the strongest words, stating that she refused to give Lane a second of her thoughts. She described him as a monster and a pathetic excuse for a human being. As she spoke, Lane laughed, further fueling the family's fury. The impact of Lane's actions on the families was immeasurable. They shared their pain, their shattered lives, and the constant fear they now lived with. Palmator's mother expressed her worry every time her family members left the house, fearing it would be the last time she saw them. The family's words and emotions painted a vivid picture of the devastation caused by Lane's merciless rampage. In the courtroom, Judge David Fury questioned the motive behind T.J. Lane's merciless rampage. He stated that no clear answer had been provided, leaving everyone perplexed. The judge described Lane as someone who simply wanted to make a big splash, make front-page news. He emphasized that Lane's attack had no discernible motive, provocation, or reason, making him an extremely dangerous individual. Taking into account Lane's actions and the impact they had on the community, the judge delivered his verdict. Lane was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison with no chance for parole. The judge highlighted that Lane was not insane, incompetent, or impaired during the attack. He emphasized that Lane consciously and methodically carried out a plan to kill, fully aware of the wrongfulness of his actions. Michael Swanson.
We find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, signed foreperson.
Michael Swanson wasn't much different from T.J. Lane. He smiled when the judge delivered a verdict that would put him behind bars. His troubled past was marked by a series of red flags that hinted at the darkness lurking within him, but no one could have predicted the horrifying crime spree that would forever alter the lives of 2 innocent women and land Swanson a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It all began on a fateful night in November when Swanson, just 17 years old at the time, embarked on a path of destruction that would leave a community in shock. Armed with a stolen gun, he targeted a convenience store, his mind consumed by a twisted desire for power and control. In a cold and calculated manner, Swanson took the lives of 2 innocent employees, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. During his trial, the courtroom was filled with palpable tension as the families of the victims and the community at large sought justice for the lives lost. But what was perhaps most disturbing was Swanson's complete lack of remorse. As the evidence against him mounted, he showed no signs of empathy or regret, his eyes devoid devoid of any flicker of humanity. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Swanson's troubled past, revealing a pattern of violent behavior and a disregard for the well-being of others. Red flags had been raised throughout his adolescence, from his involvement in fights to his fascination with weapons. Yet, despite these warning signs, no one could have predicted the depths of darkness that Swanson would ultimately descend into.
Have I accurately portrayed your verdict, sir? And do the rest of you agree with that representation?
As the trial progressed, the courtroom was filled with gasps of disbelief as witnesses recounted the gruesome details of Swanson's crimes. The families of the victims, their hearts heavy with grief, listened intently, their eyes filled with tears as they grappled with the senseless loss of their loved ones. But perhaps the most shocking moment came during Swanson's sentencing. As the judge handed down the life sentence, Swanson's reaction was nothing short of chilling. There was no remorse, no hint of regret. Instead, he displayed a disturbing calmness, as if the gravity of his actions meant nothing to him. The impact of Swanson's crimes reverberated far beyond the courtroom walls. The community was left in a state of shock and disbelief, struggling to comprehend how a young man could commit such heinous acts. The families of the victims were forever scarred, their lives shattered by the senseless violence that had taken their loved ones away. Dylan Schumacher.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
But these words never showed in the behaviors of Dylan Schumacher before a heartbreaking murder. The case of Dylan Schumacher is a harrowing tale of betrayal and unspeakable violence that shook a community to its core. Entrusted with the care of his girlfriend's son, Schumacher committed an act so heinous that it resulted in the death of a defenseless toddler, Austin Smith. The details that emerged during his trial were nothing short of horrifying, leaving those in the courtroom and the wider public in a state of disbelief. Schumacher, just 16 years old at the time, was left to babysit. What should have been a moment of responsibility and care turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. In a fit of rage, Schumacher subjected the toddler to a merciless beating, inflicting injuries that would prove fatal. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sobs of the victim's family. The evidence against Schumacher was overwhelming, leaving no doubt as to his guilt. But what was perhaps most shocking was his complete lack of remorse. Throughout the proceedings, Schumacher remained emotionless, his eyes vacant, as if he were disconnected from the gravity of his actions.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't.
The prosecution painted a picture of a troubled young man, one with a history of anger and violence. Witnesses testified to Schumacher's volatile temperament, recounting instances of aggression and outbursts of rage. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. As the trial reached its climax, the victim's family took the stand, their pain and grief palpable. Through tear-filled testimonies, they spoke of the devastation that Schumacher had brought upon them. Their words echoed through the courtroom, leaving those present with a profound sense of loss and a chilling reminder of the consequences of unchecked anger.
The court hereby imposes a minimum sentence of 25 years.
When the judge handed down the life sentence, Schumacher's reaction was chillingly devoid of emotion. He showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the irreversible damage he had caused. It was a stark contrast to the anguish and heartbreak etched on the faces of the victim's family, who had hoped for some semblance of remorse or accountability. The impact of Schumacher's actions reverberated far beyond the courtroom walls. The community was left grappling with the horrifying reality that a young life had been taken in such a brutal manner. The tragedy served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need to address the underlying issues that can lead to such acts of violence. The case of Dylan Schumacher stands as a haunting indication of the darkness that can reside within seemingly ordinary individuals. Mackenzie Sherilla. In the annals of crime, few cases are as disturbing as that of Mackenzie Sherilla, a teenager who intentionally crashed her car into a wall at 100 mph, killing her boyfriend and a friend. On a fateful day in July 2022, the quiet suburb of Strongsville, Ohio, became the backdrop for a horrifying incident that would forever change the lives of two families. Mackenzie Sherilla, a 19-year-old girl known for her reckless behavior, embarked on a path of destruction that would lead to the deaths of her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their close friend, Davion Flanagan. In the early hours of the morning, as the world slept, Sherilla made a conscious decision to turn her car into a deadly weapon. With a calculated intent, she accelerated her vehicle to an astonishing speed of 100 mph, hurtling towards a commercial building with a force that would shatter lives. The impact was catastrophic, reducing the car to a twisted heap of metal and claiming the lives of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan in an instant.
So deeply sorry.
As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was no accident. Mackenzie Sharilla's actions were deliberate, premeditated, and fueled by a dark motive that would soon come to light. In the aftermath of the crash, the legal system swiftly moved to hold Sharilla accountable for her actions. The charges brought against her were nothing short of grave. The presiding judge, Nancy Margaret Russo, who shared no relation to the victim, described Sharilla's actions as controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. It was a chilling characterization that left no room for doubt. This was murder.
I wish I could take all your pain away, and I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much.
In addition to the murder charges, the court found her guilty of aggravated vehicular homicide, recognizing the immense danger she posed to herself and others on the road. Furthermore, it was revealed that Sharilla was in possession of drugs at the time of the crash, compounding the severity of her actions. The gravity of the charges weighed heavily on the courtroom as the families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan sought justice for their loved ones. The prosecution, led by Tim Troop, painted a picture of a tumultuous relationship between Sharilla and Russo, suggesting that she had planned to end the lives of her passengers. The defense, represented by James McDonnell, argued that there was no concrete evidence to support the claim that Sharilla intended to kill the men. However, Judge Russo firmly rejected the defense's arguments, emphasizing that it was a calculated act of murder. Mackenzie Sharilla, choosing to remain silent throughout the proceedings, finally broke her silence during the sentencing hearing. Tears streamed down her face as she read a statement expressing her remorse. Sharilla's statement read, "I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I wish I could take all your pain away." However, her words could not undo the devastation she had wrought. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment where the weight of her actions bore down upon her. The impact of her choices shattered not only the lives of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan, but also the lives of their families. While the families sought closure and justice, they knew that nothing could bring back their loved ones. The pain they carried would forever be a part of their lives, a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of Mackenzie Sharilla's actions. If you found this video enlightening, as it brought to light what you rarely knew about these kids who were condemned to death, please click on the card shown on the screen.